what does it mean to apply a change from projects to products, operating model? A lot of organizations that are using frameworks such as SAFe are using features and epics. How do we make sure that our work on these features and epic is not just a feature factory, but to really focus on our customers, really focused on outcomes, really steered with evidence. And we'll be talking about techniques from the world of sense and respond, the lean product management version of sense and respond, tools like lean product canvas, hypothesis prioritization, the lean strategy canvas, and how those could fit into an organization that's already scaling using multiple levels of an agile way of working or driving goals in the organization. So we'll talk about strategic alignment for effective OKRs that are aligned around strategy and how to interweave Kanban flow and product thinking mindset. This is how I look at what it means to really be in a product operating model. I see it as some sort of pyramid because the elements build upon each other, but also because they make sense when in this order when we're trying to implement them in most organizations. It's not a strict linear relation between them. Sometimes you'll dive into speed and empiricism right away, but most of the time, this progression makes sense. This fits into the whole notion of this talk. Most of the organizations I work with get to the point where they have a relatively stable feature factory. That's not the starting point. The starting point is a lot of the time chaos or project management, but you're changing the project metaphor to a feature metaphor by breaking the work into what we might call minimally marketable features and starting to create a flow of these features throughout the organization and improving that flow. That's the first step of becoming a product-oriented organization. You can't really start talking about product orientation if you're still working in everything is tasks and not even a feature factory. A stable feature factory is the starting point for starting to think about product orientation, in my experience. Sometimes what organizations have is just that flow at the team level. So teams start to think about features and flowing them. If it's a larger organization, we start to think about it when multiple teams need to come together to work on features. Let's create a common board at that flight level to manage the interaction of these teams to deliver a feature together. If there are even bigger initiatives that we're tackling, that's typically the time that we start to think about the flow of these initiatives, whether you call it epics, projects, or initiatives, or bets, whatever the language, to start to make sure that we're thinking about the flow at that level. So I'm not going to talk about it too much. I could talk for days about scaling with Kanban and how to apply Kanban at the enterprise level. But for this conversation, it's just the starting point, because after you do that, go back to the model for a second, you need to start thinking about, are we focusing on outcomes? And a lot of the times we are not. If you take a look at what are the items that are flowing at these multiple levels, most of the time what you'll see is that those cards are not really outcomes. What you'll often see are activities. We need to do this. We need to develop this capability, this model, just a name for that new model, new feature that we're developing. That's a typical transition that we manage in the journey towards a feature factory. The switch from cards or activities to activities might be steps in the workflow on the Kanban board. We still need to manage it, but they become steps, and the cards themselves are the outputs. So developing a new single login feature or a new chatbot, the new chatbot would be the output. The activities would be, we need to explore it, we need to design it, we need to build it, to test it, and the way we model the activities in this wall. So there's a different conversation around, should we even be doing these activities at the layer of a feature, or should we break that feature down into smaller outputs and do the activities at that level? What are the right activities to manage at the feature level? What are the right activities to manage at the story level? And that's a good conversation around which elements make sense on the feature board, which elements make sense on more detailed board for the stories, and which elements make sense at even a higher level. So the realization in most organizations that I meet is most of our execution, our artifacts, whatever we manage using agile, focuses on activities outputs and resource allocation. On the other side, we have senior leadership and a lot of our high level goals that talk about the impact, revenue, margins, those kind of measures. And that's a chasm, a gap that creates issues when we try to make sure that the work is connected, that is in service of something really useful. A lot of the time, both when teams look at it and try to figure out why are we doing the work that we're doing, and welcome. One of the things that happens when we have this gap between the teams that are focused on resources, activities, and outputs, and they don't understand what's the impact of the work that they're doing. And on the other end, senior leadership focusing on the impact. And what they hear from teams is a list of features at best. Maybe it's activities like we need to develop, we need to test, we need to create the design. They don't really relate that activity to something useful. It's hard for them to be motivated, engaged, and give feedback. The key element of being a customer-centric product organization is to switch to focusing on outcomes in the sense of what people do with what we're building. What would be different in our customer's role when we succeed? And that should be in the service of the impact that we're looking for. We might want to grow our revenue. What additional service are we providing to our customers in order to grow our revenue? We want to improve our margins. How are we going to make life easier for our internal customers in service of improving our margin? Those are some of the questions that we need to start with. A lot of the work when you're taking an organization from project to product is around what are the artifacts that we're using, what is the language, what is the conversation when we're talking about the work. It starts with the name. A lot of time, what I see is names of things that still reflect the solution. That's an anti-pattern I see in organizations I work with. For example, a feature might have the feature name. In Epic, might have the solution name that we're thinking about in that epic. And yes, we might already have some solution in mind, but we need to be doing the best that we can to take a step back from that solution about the outcome we're trying to drive. If you look, for example, at the safe epic hypothesis statement here on the left, it takes a while until it gets to the business outcome. What I like to do is get to the outcome earlier and feature that outcome in the name of this epic. Maybe not initially, but as soon as you figure out this is the outcome we're looking for, this is the outcome for our customers that will enable the business impact, I like to change epic name to that because shifting the artifact can shift the conversation. One of the success stories I've seen is portfolio leaders at the customer I'm working with got this message. They challenge each other. They challenge the business. They challenge product managers in their organization to talk in outcomes. Whenever somebody brings a solution, they ask, okay, can we change the name of this to something that's more outcome oriented? Some other things that really help in this conversation is to talk about, what do we know? What do we not know? An artifact that I really like to use for this is the lean product canvas. We'll talk about it in a bit, but the way I do this is, remember, we have that portfolio Kanban board or product level Kanban board. That product board manages features. At the portfolio level, we look at our initiatives, whether you want to call it epics or anything else. The important thing is, as you're considering and as you're steering these product capabilities that you're working on or that you're thinking about working on, to use product language as you're thinking through it, to use product decision filters as you're working through it. The best way to do that is to use the right artifact at that level. The moment you start to consider an option in your Kanban board, you start to work through whatever artifact makes sense to you. I like to use the lean product canvas. So the moment something appeared in the funnel, then you decide, let's explore whether this makes sense. In the safe, portfolio Kanban board, this is where we're starting to review. We pull from the funnel into review. If you're thinking about a feature, in your feature level, you're pulling from your product backlog into discover. And at that point, you start to think through these stages of the lean product canvas. First of all, what's the business problem that that this is addressing? It could be an opportunity, but there should be something in the business that this would be in service of. Ideally, we already have some strategic direction of what are the overall business problems that we're focused on. We'll get to it later, but a sign I see often is people struggle to answer this question because there's no business strategy of where are we focusing on? What are we trying to solve? If you're seeing that, it might be a good hint to think about strategy, as we'll see later. A lot of the way we're practicing this, we're introducing this, is I'm not necessarily saying you need to start with your strategy. Not necessarily saying, start with coming up with your strategic goals, with your strategic themes, OKRs, whatever you want to call it. Often what we do is actually start with the actual work, get that work flowing, get that work more outcome oriented. And through the fact that we see gaps, that we see we're struggling to answer these questions, why are we doing this work? Beyond the fact that it was in some backlog, we understand, we pull the need for having strategic conversations. And that works better. We're inviting people to think about strategy rather than inflicting a strategy conversation that they will roll their eyes over. So we start with, what is the most important problem your business needs to focus on right now? And let's say we address that or we leverage the opportunity. How would we know? What would we measure to know that we're successful? This could be business metrics. It could also be, how would we know that product outcome has achieved what it needs in order to achieve those business metrics? Remember, one of the nuances here is this is a product initiative. It's not a business initiative. You could say, let's apply this thinking also to business initiatives, and that makes sense. As long as you're talking about what's going on inside your product organization, you're focused on business problems, but you cannot solve business problems. You cannot deliver business results on your own in most organizations. What you can deliver is product outcomes that enable achieving the business results. If we solve the business problem, then we'll see that we grow revenue and customers are staying for a longer time, their lifetime value increases, we don't have as much churn. We'll see these business results. But it's even more relevant for the people working in the product organization to answer the question, okay, that's nice, but that's a bit beyond the horizon for us. What are the product outcomes that we will achieve, that if we achieve them, we have pretty good confidence that they will serve those business results? For example, we might say, if we have a problem that customers are not renewing their subscriptions, the business outcome that we would like to see is, reduced churn and improved lifetime value of our customers. The product metrics might be, we see people are using the product more. And we will feel pretty confident that if people are using the product on an ongoing basis, there's a much lower chance that they will churn. That would be what we talk about here, the business impact and how we're supporting that. Then we talk about, okay, what are we talking about here? If we want to achieve this business outcome, it will be achieved by some customers, internal or external, some users that will behave differently. Those customers need to use the product, otherwise they will not renew. What we're talking about is some internal group. We will improve our margins if our customer support people use AI more to research and answer questions. We believe that they'll be able to serve more people, turn issues faster at the same or higher quality. So I mixed a bit both 3 and 4, but it's first, who are the users, who are the personas, and what's the job that they're getting done? What are they trying to achieve? What are they struggling with right now? That if we would solve for them through the solution that we have in mind, would achieve a benefit for them that would serve and create the product outcome and the business benefit for us or the organization. And we form all of that into an hypothesis. We believe that a certain business outcome will be achieved if our users attain this benefit. We believe that we will see improved lifetime value if our customers get better results to their research attempts with us by using this new Gen AI-based research. So that's an assumption. One of the important next steps is to talk about how we feel about this assumption. How much risk do we have about it? Before I cover 7 and 8, I want to talk about something else. There's a dichotomy, two extreme versions that I often see. One is we spend tons of time in analysis paralysis, trying to figure out all of the details, coming up with the right hypothesis, talking to ourselves forever, even talking to customers for way too long, and we don't see any value. Or jumping straight into, we know this is the solution we need, our CEO thinks this is what we need to go build, and we just go and build it as quick as possible without thinking it through. Not thinking about feasibility, and maybe thinking too much about feasibility and not thinking about if people really want this. One of the challenges is we invest too much in things where we don't have the right level of conviction. We see people that bring portfolio initiatives, they bring ideas and they champion them, and they're energized and they convince everybody and say, this is the ROI. Then there's always the ROI for things that we bring in. If we build it, a lot of them would come. We will build the pipeline with customers through this. This is what typically happens in a sales-driven organization. A product-driven organization needs to balance between being a champion for business ideas and product ideas, but also being skeptical about them. We want to stay in this smart zone where we learn as efficiently as possible. The key here is to learn a lot while investing little. So learn before you burn. That's the goal of the discovery phase. Whether we're talking about the product level or a portfolio level, that's our goal. So The first question we need to ask ourselves is, what's the level of conviction that we have? This is where you use the hypothesis prioritization. So if you have an idea, you created the product canvas for it, you got to the point that you have the hypothesis. Now you ask yourself, okay, let's look at this. How much value do I think there is? How big is the business problem? How worthwhile is the business outcome we can achieve? If it's low, okay, let's talk about what do we do. If it's high, let's talk about what do we do. The second question is, how much risk is there? Or in other words, how much conviction do we have about the hypothesis? Is it a wild guess that this would be valid? And let's talk about what do we do with each one of these mixes of value and risk. If it's high value and high risk, we need to test. And we'll talk about how to test it. If it's high value and lower risk, let's ship it. Let's work on delivering it. If we are already in high conviction at this point, let's skip the discovery process. Let's go straight into delivering it, shipping it, but measuring to make sure that we're delivering value. We're still interested in leading indicators as soon as we start to ship to see that there's real value that we're delivering. Now, if the value is low, if it's still low risk, you don't want to go test. You usually don't go and build, but if there's something that still makes sense from a value return on investment perspective, maybe build it. Maybe it's a table stakes. Maybe it's something you just need to do. It won't really move the needle. Login, payment, those kind of things are often in this quadrant. The last option is it's high risk and low perceived value. This one should go to the trash. You don't want to spend any more time with this. The key is how quickly can you go through this exercise? You don't want to spend too much time thinking about something before you categorize it this way. The idea is to explore an idea as efficiently as possible and decide, do we go with tracer bullets, with testing? Do we skip it straight to shipping, whether it's, a lot of value and we're going to test, or something small, we really have to do it, we go there, or do we just drop it? This whole process is a funnel. Not everything will be approved. Because of that, we need to minimize our investment in the exploration phase so that we can explore more ideas. Sometimes we will find that it's hard for us to answer the question, why are we doing this? What is the business problem that this is intended to solve? If we have a lot of options on our Kanban board, and we often do, we need to have some decision filter that helps us decide. This is where strategic goals help us. We want to use them as the decision filter for product ideas that we're considering. So whether you call it a strategic goal, an OKR, strategic themes, the Lean Strategy Canvas is a tool I won't get too far into today, but it asks the questions that help you form your strategy. What overall business goal that we're trying to achieve? What's our biggest obstacle right now in achieving that goal? Where do we need to focus? What's our strategy? Our strategy could be around what market are we going into, or internally, which area are we focused on bringing AI into? Are we focused on bringing AI, let's say, into, and I promise not to speak too much about AI, but it's just as an example. If leadership is saying we need to go into AI, we need to be a bit more granular. It helps to say, we believe AI will help us grow by automating our market, by bringing us many more potential prospects without growing our sales force dramatically. It should be that our biggest challenge right now is not the opportunity. Plenty of opportunity, plenty of potential customers. Our product-led growth is expanding like fire. If you look at some AI tools like Lovable, Base 44, they don't need more leads right now. But if you try to use the tool and experience their customer support, you realize they really need to improve how they fulfill, how they support their customers, because customers are churning like crazy. Their strategy might be, okay, what we really need to do now is level up our game for how we make our customers happy. We will win by providing a vibe coding tool that doesn't frustrate its users, but makes them love it. It's not just about people loving the applications that you build. It's people loving to work with your tool, not being frustrated by it. And that can become a strategic OKR. What's not in that OKR is how are we going to do that? We're not saying we're going to hire an army of customer support. We're not saying we're going to use AI for the customer support. We're not saying we're going to improve the product so it doesn't need customer support. We're going to make this a product that people love to use, not be frustrated by the users for this, would rave about using the product. Now we can start to consider product options for how do we bring that to life. We might have options on the table for how can we close this business gap that we're focused on. And this becomes a filter for which ideas to advance, consider, ship and make. OKRs don't just live as a filter for this board. What I typically do is, instead of managing a separate list of strategic OKRs and product organization OKRs and the initiatives in the Kanban board, I often just integrate them. If you think about each one of these product canvases that we talked about, and the fact that eventually we want to use the outcome as the name and the driver for this thing, it's a very short distance between that and using an objective and key results, a goal, to describe the entity that is flowing on the Kanban board. So essentially, your product portfolio Kanban board becomes a thing that manages goals and outcomes rather than solutions, which gives a lot more optionality for teams to figure out how to achieve that outcome along the way. Maybe the solution hypothesis didn't work and we're looking for a different way to achieve that. We're still focusing on the outcome. We're still focusing on the goal. Another good thing about this is it brings discipline and flow into drafting and monitoring your Kanbans in a way that's integrated into your life cycle, not a separate conversation. Let's go back to the conversation around testing. Let's assume we had a feature and we decided we need to test it. How do we go about doing that? The key idea here is to use the truth curve to run the minimum viable test. And that's not necessarily a minimum viable product. This is an example from a client where in a training workshop, we talked about this concept of how do we run lean product discovery? What are options for testing? And instead of building an initial version of the product, we ran a customer survey. We gave a certain set of customers this explanation for what the product does. And then we gave another explanation of what the product does. And we looked for differences in their knowledge and actions after those different explanations. And based on the results from that, we changed the trajectory of that initiative. The outcome was still that we want people to trade more with the product or wiser decisions without needing additional handholding by professionals. But the whole direction that the team took for this, that the initiative owner took for this, changed very cheaply without building anything by leveraging the truth curve. One of the interesting things about the truth curve that we're seeing here that has many techniques, I like to look at the body of work of prototyping to look at some of these ideas. There are many sources for this and a lot about these options in the Lean Product Discovery Workshop. AI is changing that game a bit. It's not changing the principle. The truth curve still applies, but AI tools like vibe coding are making it cheaper to build an actual prototype, but it's also making it cheaper to run marketing tests and consumer testing. I heard today about a new AI tool called Rally, not the agile tool, Rally, which essentially helps. I didn't look in depth yet, but it gives you the option to run focus groups, to build a persona around your users and their jobs to be done, and to run research to see how they react to, a problem that you put in front of them, a solution idea that you put in front of them. You could interview these sort of customers. Of course, it's not as good as a real customer interview. I can tell you without using that tool, just using classic ChatGPT, Gemini, I can rule out a lot of ideas by putting them in front of a simulated audience that I build with information about my customers. A lot of ideas come to my mind when I'm stuck in the solution trap, in the innovators trap. Just by working at this level, I can roll them out. It doesn't mean that they will succeed, but it can rule out some things. I can run more experiments this way. At some point, I'll need to do real customer interviews. I'll need to talk about the problem with real customers for the things that do pass that level. AI is compressing the truth curve. It's not changing the overall physics of the truth curve, but it's compressing it. After you come up with a plan for how to test, you want to continue managing that initiative, that product idea. It's not just about, this is the plan that we're going to execute. We do want to steer using evidence. One of the cool techniques you can try in this space is called the sniff test. The sniff test was invented by Mark Richards. He presented it in the last Safe Summit. But essentially, you look at different aspects of the outcome that you're focused on, the product initiative that you're focused on, whether that's customers, desirability, viability, feasibility, or sustainability. And you ask yourself, how much do we know about this? What's the level of clarity for that aspect? Do we know who is the customer? Is it clear to us? Is it clear to us that this is desirable? That this can make money? This is viable? That it's feasible for us to build it, that it's sustainable for us to deliver this to the market. It can be desirable, viable, and feasible, and still, this is unsustainable in the scheme of things. Some organizations care about that, some don't. The key point is you want to look for a misbalance, look for items, see if you can identify on this picture items which are worrying, where if you're having a conversation, you're sitting in front of your Kanban board, let's say in your portfolio scene, you're wondering about why is that thing there? Why are we advancing so much when we know so little? Or why are we still stuck when we already know a lot? Those could be two things that happen. The important thing is they drive a conversation about de-risking at the appropriate level. This is some sort of canvas that I created that maps identified risk on an initiative to the approach of the risk. And we can see that there are areas which make sense. All of the greens are areas which make sense. High risk, we should be, de-risking heavily through testing, through discovery and testing. This is the place where you want to see alpha, see differentiation, remarkable results, remarkable outcomes. With a low risk in your testing, this is not good. This is procrastination. We could just go and deliver. In this case, what like makes sense is to move from testing into let's just decide to ship and measure. We have enough information at this point. Let's ship and measure. Things could change, by the way. Something could have started as high risk, but for leading indicators, we now reduce the risk. We validated an assumption. And at this point, it makes sense for us to switch into shipping and measuring. Let's take the other extreme, high risk, which we're just doing it, really worrying. Medium risk, we're just doing it. It's a question, what's making us do it? Why are we jumping ahead? Is it politics? What could we change in the way we work to minimize the situations where we have those pink slips? Those are very interesting conversations to have with product leaders and portfolio leaders. Often you start above water and there's a lot going on in the iceberg. Instead of focusing on saving these ideas and delivering them, go upstream and figure out what is going on here. What is making us work this way? A lot of time, that's the culture, the high level process. If at the product level, we see these things, this is where I start to have portfolio level conversations, because maybe it's portfolio level processes that aren't thinking about risk, our outcomes and evidence-based management that are feeding work as you have to go do this to our products. In order to do this well, you need to find leading indicators that enable steering. It's hard to improve clarity on something when it is in discovery if you don't have good leading indicators. Even in ship and measure, you're delivering things, but is it increasing clarity? It can only increase clarity. It can only change, the smell of something when there's metrics that tell you what's going on. I can tell you what metrics don't help with anything but feasibility. Things like velocity and flow metrics. I'm a huge fan of flow metrics, but they don't help with anything but feasibility. They, our velocity, our throughput, our flow time, none of those tell us anything about, is this gonna deliver value? All good flow does is it gives us a fast feedback loop to the point at which we will learn whether we can actually deliver value. But if we don't have leading indicators that we can look at the end of this feedback loop, it's useless. It improves the execution. It's a better feature factory, but it's not a product lab. And what we want is to move from being a feature factory to becoming a product lab. So leading indicators is the new frontier. And it's not trivial to figure out the leading indicator that is on one hand responsive, where we can close feedback loops, but on the other end, predictive. That tells us something we can trust around, is this really gonna achieve the desired result? If we go back to the churn example, how do we know that product outcomes that we're building are really going to reduce churn? If we're looking at product usage, that could be a leading indicator. Is that responsive enough? Maybe it is. If we can deliver often and we really believe that what we're building is going to drive better usage the moment we deliver it, then that's a good leading indicator. The more we go into enterprise environments that are not easy to manage, the harder it is to come with effective leading indicators. But it's an important step to focus on. So throughout your life cycle of your products, whether it's features or bigger initiatives, you need to start thinking about leading indicators. You don't have to have them from the get-go. It doesn't make sense to have a leading indicator before you've thought through what are we even doing this. And when you're starting to review something, it's okay to settle for lagging indicators. But when you're diving deeper into a discovery plan, especially if you're going to test something, you need to align on what would the leading indicators be, what does success look like, what will failure look like, what's our kill criteria. During discovery, you want to collect these leading indicators. It doesn't have to be automatic, but you need to have conversations about these leading indicators in order to close the feedback. All right, I see that we're almost at time. I want to pause for questions before I dive into scaling OKRs. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or feel free to ask in the chat. And while we wait, I'll cover a little bit of thoughts about scaling OKRs. This might require I'll dive deeper into this in my next lecture. So when we're talking about a large organization that has multiple products, multiple departments, maybe even portfolios, you'll need to have OKRs at multiple levels. The more people you have in the organization, the more functions, the more teams, typically the more OKRs you have. And that creates a challenge. Whenever you start to scale something, it becomes more complex, specifically in the OKR world. Cascading OKRs, which is the typical way this is done, is the major risk, which is switching from outcomes to tasks. Depending on how you do this, it's very common that a good outcome, product outcome focused on the business OKR at the top level turns into very prescriptive activity or output-oriented definitions as you cascade it into the organization. The main reason that this happens is that your organization, whether it's the product organization or beyond, is not really product-oriented. It's still oriented around functions, around systems, around responsibilities. And when that is the case, or around projects, when that is the case, it's very hard to say this one outcome-oriented goal maps neatly into this group, because the group cannot really deliver that outcome. The team that owns a function, whether that's front end, back end, or whether it's this specific product or that product, or even outside of product, HR, customer success, sales enablement, cannot really own cross-cutting outcomes. Strategic outcomes for the organization are cross-cutting a lot of the time. Strategic product outcomes cut across functions inside the product organization most of the time. You cannot really use one OKR and empowered ownership, because the organization is typically full of these dependencies. There are few situations where teams can deliver product outcomes on their own. It's much more common that they'll need other teams or even many other teams and functions across the organization. Instead of spending too much time figuring out how do we scale OKRs to this situation, which you could, ideally, you want to start to flip the pyramid. You want to flip to most of the work, or the majority of the work can be delivered by empowered team that can take a goal, an outcome-oriented goal, and deliver it. So you don't have to split your goal into activities and tasks, and you don't have to assign one goal to too many teams and create a collaboration nightmare between. Collaboration is great, but if too many teams collaborate, it becomes overhead, it becomes hard. So you want to flip the pyramid. When you do that, you reduce the coordination overhead and create an environment where fewer goals are needed. You don't need as big of an OKR cascade. You need a smaller, more focused OKR network that is more outcome oriented. We're creating customer outcomes, whether internal customers or external. And if you're doing this within the product organization, that's one step forward. The real transition is organizing around value across the business. So not just the product organization, but together with whoever is needed in order to achieve a strategic outcome. A lot of the work that I'm talking about today, you can start with moving the product organization, the delivery organization, technology from project to product. But the real vision is making that change for the entire business, thinking about developing your business capabilities using product thinking, focusing on outcomes and sensing and responding using evidence. So essentially, the maneuver that you want to apply in order to scale lean product management is both to use some of the practices that I talked about today, but also to make it much easier by flipping the pyramid. We talked about different techniques and moves that you can make to apply this product operating model approach that focuses on flow, aligns around outcomes, create an environment of serving and empowering teams and creating autonomy that increases speed and leveraging that speed to create empiricism, to really learn, to use leading indicators to steer towards those outcomes. All of these things come together. And a lot of the time, in order to really achieve them, you need to balance between reacting and doing the move that makes sense in the context, but also thinking more strategically. Think about applying the lean strategy canvas to your own organization and going upstream and thinking about what would need to be true in order to really do this well. What are the practices that we're using now as a workaround for a deeper, stronger foundation that we would really need to build? I'm not saying you have to go there immediately, but keep your eye on what could we do with the upstream? Who do we need to talk to in order to really scale lean product management? A lot of the time by descaling our organization. So I hope this was a useful view on the techniques of lean product management and how to use them, how to not abuse them, how maybe you can bring them into a world where you're practicing something like the Scaled Agile framework or any other scaling technique. And to remember that a lot of the time, the scaling actually comes from descaling. One kind of thought is for this journey of scaling lean product management in your organization, all of the tools that we talked about can be used for that journey. Think of yourself as a lean product manager trying to create better outcomes in the product experience for the organization. What's your hypothesis? Why are you doing this? What's the business constraint that it's supposed to solve? Use that to pitch these ideas, to test these ideas, and to eventually see traction, see what's working, look at leading indicators for whether this is a better experience for the people that are building products in your organization or tackling complex problems in your organization, and sense and respond based on that.